when we did this in 2006, things were a little rosier. Then we were in surplus, and we stayed in surplus until the pressures of aging and costs started to bend the line up. We only got to 100%, which was the end of the war or Greece. So, that would be hard to endure, but there it is. So the drivers of that rising debt are future spending outstrips revenue, deficit, and the growth of the demographic change, the aging population, cost growth, a lot of government spending to the real wage growth, like superannuation, and then wage bills get fed through the government as well. In health, we want better gadgets and more things to be treated, so that demand adds to some of the spending. And then once you get into trouble, you have that compounding. Einstein said it was the greatest force in the universe. It just feeds on itself. Now, I'm going to jump a lot of this demographic stuff because Natalie Jackson has dealt with that. So yes, we've got a baby boom, but it's not the baby boomers' fault. They kept the population young in the last part of the 20th century, and they're going to make it a little bit older in the 21st century. They're accelerating the transition to a permanently older population. And we'll just pass this. Superannuation. Well, 500,000 people are receiving super now, and it's projected to grow to 1.3 million in 2050. And super is indexed to wages, and so when economic growth happens, wages go up, and so does super. So it gets more expensive, and they're growing with sort of GDP. New Zealand's public pension system is pretty special in the OECD. It's almost universal. About 94% of people over 65 are receiving it now, a little bit over the 94%. There's a funny collection of dates there. 1898 was when we had our first public pension system, and life expectancy was around about 60, and the pension age was set at 65. It doesn't mean to say no one ever got it. There were lots of conditions around it as well, but that situation has never happened again. In 1977, Mr. Muldoon brought in essentially the scheme we have now with tweaks. Life expectancy was 74 then, males and females sort of averaged out, and the pension age was 60. And so it continued through to 1990 as life expectancy continued to rise. And then between 92 and 2001, the pension at the age of eligibility for superannuation went up. And in 2009, we now have a life expectancy of 80. So you can see there's a sort of flat dropping and wobbling between 60 and 65 pension age, and life expectancy has this inexorable march upwards, so that more and more of our lives, on average, will be spent receiving the pension. So really, wrong. How did that happen? I seem to be going backwards. Does this sort of go... Depends which way you're holding it. Oh, yeah. High tech. It has some really good effects, the way super is set up. You can stay in a job after 65. You're not booted out. There's no forced retirement. It's not income tested. Those have good things. The participation rate of people over 65 in New Zealand is amongst the highest in the world. There's still a drop, though. It might be 60% of males between 60 and 64 are in the labour force, but that drops to 30. There's this rule of halves, and then the next 5-year group drops by half. And the same with women, not as high, but they drop. So there is an incentive to say, OK, I've had enough. I want to stop, and super is there whether you decide to work or not. So oops, I don't want to do that thing. So that's super. Welfare benefits. The largest ones are unemployment benefit, dependent person benefit, sickness benefit, and benefit. I'll leave the accommodation supplement aside. They're all income tested. Unlike super, which grows with the wave, you've hit the floor. These grow by history. That seems to have been the case, and practice too. What we do in our modelling is very simple. This is a rather embarrassing part to admit. We get the recent proportions of age groups. For example, for invalids benefit, the proportion of people who receive it goes up with age until 60 to 64, and then you're on super, so it doesn't really count after that. Now, so that there is an aging effect there. As the population gets more people who are older and relatively fewer people who are in the middle group and younger, then you're going to get an increase in the amount of money being paid, if you use this kind of fixed proportion thing, paid IB. Sickness benefit has a flatter profile, so that as the population ages and shifts up the sort of centre of gravity shifts up that curve, sickness benefit isn't dependent. The main cost drivers of these four benefits in the front there are inflation, is indexing, and population growth with a little bit of aging. This is quite an interesting chart, stolen, of course, from Michael Fletcher's paper on SB and IB. Way back when I was a young person, a little bit before my birth, about 1% of the working age people, 15 to 64, were on sickness benefit, so together on sickness and invalids benefit. And that drifted down a bit. So it was fairly flat until about the mid-70s when, between 1975 and 1980, these both things started to rise. Invalids benefit was a steadier growth than sickness benefit, the white line, which wobbled around a bit. And above that, you can see the unemployment benefit. By the mid-80s, with economic restructuring and so forth, and 1990, it shot up to 7.5% of the working age population who were receiving an unemployment benefit. And then it comes down, and then you have that, what is it, the Asian, there was another recession just before 2000, yeah, the Asian crisis. So there's a business cycle a bit lagged in the unemployment benefit, and you can see the little click up at the end of the latest one. Now, sickness benefit does seem to have some kind of lagged response to the business cycle there, but invalids benefit doesn't. We've now reached 3% of the working population. That's about 85%, 85,000 people. I've got no head for numbers, and about 2% for the sickness benefits. So what we do with that is this is the embarrassing thing, holding those proportions of various age groups who are on these benefits fixed. Then all you see there is the growth of the working age population in the projections. If we were to follow that trend that you saw in that last thing of SBIB going up like that to the end, we'd have something like 400,000 people on sickness or invalids benefit. This is a big weakness in this modelling, and because we're actually holding it at working age population group and indexing it with inflation. Inflation is slower than the growth of productivity, plus inflation, of course, and so the ratio to GDP falls away. So it would appear, on a very simple basis, that welfare is not a big problem in the long term in this stuff. Health, super, have age components in them, pushing them up, but not welfare. But I think that's because of the simple modelling. I won't talk much about health. It grows by 50% in 2050. It's much more complicated than super, which is a parametric program. It's got simple rules, and you know whether you're in or not. Health spending is a result of political decisions all the time, and so and those pressures there won't do justice.